Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. Welcome to the Gaia Asia Pacific Learn by the Nuggets, EPR Framework in Asia, Challenges and Opportunities. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Trish. I am the Network Development and Member Engagement Officer of Gaia. So before we jump in, let me share with you some important house rules. So the session will run for all attendees are muted, so kindly send your questions to the panelists using the Q&A box. If you encounter any technical issues or if you have any questions, feel free to let us know through the chat and we'll be happy to assist you to the best of our ability. So this webinar is being recorded and we'll be sharing this after the call. Lastly, we're also live on Zero Waste Asia Facebook page, so feel free to share this with your networks or friends who you feel would mostly benefit from the webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Arpita.
Thank you so much, Trish. Welcome, everyone. We are very, very excited to be hosting you all this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Today's webinar is titled EPR Framework in Asia, Challenges and Opportunities. And if you don't know what EPR is, Extended Producer Responsibility is essentially a policy principle that aims to promote a total life cycle of product system by extending the responsibilities of the manufacturer of the product beyond just producing the product and selling it to cover the entire life cycle and ideally includes systems for take back, recycling, and final disposal of the product as well. And in theory, EPR schemes have been sort of designed and posited to as essential policy solutions to address the global plastic pollution crisis we are in right now, especially as a means for funding and as a way to incentivize redesign for reuse and plastic waste prevention. So looking at the waste hierarchy principle as well. They've been around for a while, but the ongoing negotiations that you may be aware of for a global plastics treaty may mandate EPR for ratifying countries across the world. And that brings us to the important focus for this discussion today. Asia has been at the forefront of leading zero waste solutions as Gaia and Gaia Asia Pacific are members across Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, India, China, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, New Zealand, and many other countries have been demonstrating the potential of zero waste solutions through reuse and recycle and many others in their respective cities. Today, we want to explore the potential of what a good EPR looks like and help scale these solutions for our members and for our communities across the Asia and Asia Pacific region. In this endeavor, we will hear from few of our movement leaders about the Asian experience with EPR. We will delve into the challenges and opportunities ahead. And in doing so, we will look at the assessment of different policy promises already made in the region against what's happening on the ground. We will therefore shed light on country level implementation from countries in South, Southeast, and East Asia, looking at this policy's effectiveness in holding corporations accountable for plastic pollution as polluter pay policy, but also looking at the waste pickers' demands and perspective regarding EPR, who definitely are at the forefront of fighting the fight against plastic crisis. And so let me allow you to welcome the speakers that we have today. We have Pinky Chandran, who is an independent researcher, author, and journalist. She tracks policy and legal developments on issues related to waste management and its intersections. She is a founding member of Solid Waste Management Roundtable, a trustee at Hasil Dila, and a board member of the Anonymous Indian Charitable Trust. Garbage inspires her to write poetry, and she runs her own blog called wasteframes.com. And I can tell you that she's a very active player and participant in shaping the contours of the policy work that's happening across the Gaia and BFFP movement. Next, we have Colleen. Colleen Salamat has been working on campaigning to combat plastic pollution since 2019. She was previously the plastics campaigner of Oceania Philippines and is currently the campaigner of Eco Waste Coalition. She's also the outreach manager of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law and part-time lecturer at the DLAS Saleh University in the Philippines. Colleen has been working in the Philippines on the EPR law for a while now, since the beginning of those discussions, and will be shedding light in some of those challenges and opportunities ahead. Next, we have Meiko El Nino from Break Free from Plastic Movement in Asia Pacific team. He's based in Manila in the Philippines. Miko has cultivated a rich understanding of issues ranging from plastic pollution to climate change, waste management to the urban poor. For the past 2 years, he's anchored the work around sachet waste in the Asia Pacific region, and he is a well-known leader on corporate accountability in the region for our movement. And today he'll be talking about plastic credits and offsets in EPR and what are the opportunities ahead and recommendations regarding that. And lastly, we have Kabir Arora, who serves as the National Coordinator of the Alliance of Indian Waste Pickers, actively facilitating outreach efforts of the International Alliance of Waste Pickers in the Asia Pacific region. Within the IAWP, he plays a pivotal role in leading discussions related to the Plastics Treaty. Additionally, Arora is currently pursuing a PhD in geography at the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. Wow. Furthermore, he holds a fellowship at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, also based at WITS. And he's been around for many, many years, leading the voices and the work with the waste pickers in the region. So we're very, very glad that we have this esteemed panel today. And to start us off, we have Pinky. But before I forget, my name is Arpita Bhagat, and I'm the Plastic Policy Officer with Gaia Asia Pacific, and keen to learn with you all. Over to you, Pinky ji.
Thank you, Arpita. As Arpita has already defined what EPR is, that is a policy principle or framework that is through a mix of instruments enables producers to assume full responsibility or the full cost of plastic waste management. The key here is how producers are defined. Producers is a term used to define a broad umbrella of players, which includes retailers, brand owners, distributors, manufacturers, importers of products and packaging. In Indonesia, for instance, producers are defined as business actors that produce goods that use packaging, imported goods distribution by using packaging, or selling goods by using containers that cannot or are difficult to decompose by natural processes. India, on the other hand, has defined it into three categories, which is producers, importers of all imported plastic packaging, and brand owners, where it defines and includes online platforms, marketplaces, and supermarket retail chains, other than those which are micro or small enterprises as per the criteria laid down by the Ministry of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises. So the question here, the key question that everyone is asking is EPR enough towards polluter pays? Is EPR successful at plastic reduction and not recycling or collection? Well, if you go to see the application of polluter pay principle means that polluters bear the cost of their pollution, including the cost of measures taken to prevent, control, and remedy pollution, and the cost that it imposes on the society. So simply put, it basically means that polluters are incentivized to avoid environmental damages and are held responsible for the pollution that they cause. So what we are basically saying is that the polluter and not the taxpayer covers the cost of remediation. So in economic terms, this constitutes the internalization of negative environmental externality. So is it the same in practice? EPR is often touted as a holy grail to addressing the plastic pollution crisis, but like the metaphor, it is an unattainable goal. And the reason why I'm saying it is because of the flawed way in which it is designed. And many times we try to look at importing or copying what the global north has designed, failing to recognize the different realities that exist in the global south. So how can we then look at operationalizing EPR to the principle that the polluter, that the corporate producer must pay for the damages caused? because the liability must take into account the actual cost, which is definitely difficult to quantify because this includes impacts on health, climate, biodiversity across the life cycle, including the impact of mismanaged plastics and plastics released into air, land, water environments, and the impacts that it has on the informal sector. Now, a quick move to timeline. In many countries, many countries in this region have many different challenges. To give an example, EPR in India was introduced in 2011 as part of the plastic waste management handling rules. After 11 years, we have the EPR policy guidelines as part of the plastic waste management rules in 2016, and that was further amended in 2022. Yet, we are barely scratching the surface. Why? Because, for one, when it was introduced, it remained on paper. There was no vision or strategy, and there were no measurable targets, no other corresponding enabling policy instruments. Data collection mechanism was haphazard, and no one was held accountable. The business as usual scenario continued. But like I said, the problem is not just limited to India. If you look at Asian countries, what are the challenges that we are facing? One, waste segregation is not fully enforced. And there is definitely ineffective waste management systems that also includes incomplete collection systems. So while there might be services in a high income area, low income communities or informal settlements are often ignored and often invisibilized. Then you have the inadequate plastic infrastructure or even the unequal distribution within the existing infrastructure systems. There is practice of illegal dumping and open burning and reliance on landfills. There is also growth of waste to energy or cement kilns and other false technologies. Plus, there is this whole aspect of international trade and illegal dumping, poor data collection and tracking. Again, there is a complexity of relationships between the central or the federal government, the state, and the local governments or the municipalities. Plus, awareness levels on reuse and recycling tend to vary. There is also limited recognition and acknowledgement of the role of informal sector. There is in addition, when you're looking at capacity, there is poor capacity or lack of capacity among government officials. There is lack of dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding available, to tackle this whole challenges. Plus, and the most important is the lack of political will. So, given this whole scenario, I think it merits us that we look at the quick EPR timelines into who are the leaders. So countries in Asia have very different levels of EPR implementation. While some countries like Japan and Korea were established way back in the late 90s to early 2000, 2003, there are other countries that are still catching up, and there are countries that are still yet to implement EPR. Japan, for instance, started it in 1995 as part of the Act on the Promotion of Sorted Collection, Recycling of Containers, and the Packaging Act. And basically, it covers the responsibilities of state, local governments, and business operators and consumers. In addition, it also talks about, there are certain articles which talks about voluntary collection. It recognizes voluntary collection. It also talks about recycling obligations for specified packaging users, specified container manufacturers, and specified container users. Korea, on the other hand, while it introduced EPR in 2000, and applied it to paper, glass, metal cans, and plastic packaging, it implemented it only in 2003. And that under that, a mandatory recycling rate was imposed on producers. India, like I said, we started off in 2011, and this came in after recommendations by an expert committee in 2009. So the two important recommendations by that committee way back in 2009 was to include informal sector actors such as waste pickers in plastic waste management. And in 2011, the onus was on the municipal authority to operationalize EPR, through manufacturers and brand owners, and to engage with waste pickers. But like I said, nothing happened till 2016 when the plastic waste management rules came about. Again, it had the same parameters. And then we had like a series of cases that were heard at the court, and the court then ordered the government through the Central Pollution Control Board to come up with the guidelines. And so a draft EPR guidelines was released in 2021, and then it was finalized in 2022. Indonesia, on the other hand, again started off in 2008, where the Article 15 of the Waste Management Law 2008 basically stated that producers are responsible for the disposal of packaging, but there was nothing else like in India. There was no mechanism of how should they comply with the regulations, and so it remained on paper. And then then they came up with the roadmap for waste reduction by producers, where they have actually placed a target of 30% waste reduction by the end of 2029 and complete bans on certain items. The roadmap also is divided into three different stages, which is planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting stage. And there are time frames for each of the framework. But what they are actually talking about is from 2023 onwards, they're looking at developing the concepts to achieve the government's minimum targets of targets by 2029. And it also talks about incentives and disincentives, which is important. Vietnam, again, 2022 to 2022, they actually amended a law on environmental protection, and it was passed by the National Assembly in November 2020. And it contains specifications for separate collection and approaches for EPR. And the Article 72 actually talked about the term polluter pays, as well as responsibilities of organizations and individuals that generate waste. Again, with EPR in Vietnam, they have looked at certain mandatory frameworks, which is recycling framework for packaging waste management, where producers have certain obligation and they're free to set up the system either independently or hire a recycling service or hire authorized third-party organization. And they also have a contribution to the Vietnam Environmental Protection Fund. The other two mandates are recycling framework for products, so which means they have product recycling obligations. And the third is waste management framework for products that are difficult to recycle or that cannot be recycled. And in that, there are important mention of things like disposable hygiene products, balloons, duct tapes, garment, leather, footwear, accessories, construction materials. And what they also talk about is a financial contribution to support waste treatment activities based on the number of items, weight of items, or percentage of sales. Now, other countries like Cambodia haven't yet operationalized EPR. In fact, Cambodia, if you look at in the call for written submissions for potential elements for a legally binding plastic treaty, Cambodia actually submitted saying that it is in the process of designing a voluntary EPR scheme to mobilize technical and financial support to ensure effective collection and treatment of plastic waste. Though it's important to note that Cambodia states that it promotes a circular economy approach because it focuses on the famous 4 Rs, which is refuse, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Malaysia, in 2021, the Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap was released. And in that, they had looked at setting targets up to 2030. And the roadmap made a mention of mandatory EPR scheme for plastic packaging by 2026. I'm going to be using the terms mandatory and voluntary very often, but I'll come to that as to what is the crucial differentiation in both of them. Thailand, again, there have been several.
Sorry, Pinky ji, your time is up. Could you wrap up in the next 1 minute, please?
Okay, I'll just take 2 minutes. So I'll skip Cambodia. I'll skip Thailand. The other few things that I really wanted to talk about is when you're talking about the question of reduction, what do we mean? Are we looking at the decrease in the use of virgin plastics, or are we eliminating unnecessary plastic packaging? And that is important, and it needs to go beyond material substitution or what you say beyond bans that the government imposes. And if you look at what the Ellen MacArthur Global Commitment Report says, that there are more than 380 examples of plastic packaging being reduced, And one of the example it quotes is Mars removed inner trays for its chocolate multipack, eliminating 130 metric tons of packaging. Reuse is a concept that has been promoted in EPR guidelines, even in India, but there is no supporting document or supporting legal framework as to how do you enable such a system? How do you unlock barriers to reuse these solutions? And it needs to go beyond the usual models that are actually prevalent. Again, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation very clearly says that progress and ambition reuse remains limited. And so announcements is not just going to cut the deal. You have Coca-Cola saying that they're going to deliver 25% of their volumes sold through reuse models by 2030. But again, the issue is how is that going to be operationalized? And is it going to be evenly spread across different countries? Then there is this question of shared infrastructure for distribution, cleaning, logistics of reusable packaging across business, and how can the informal sector be integrated? How can people have access to finances? Very quickly, I know the time's up, but what is also important is to look at how do you complement other existing national policies. In India, we have the solid waste management rules, we have the plastic waste management rules, and we have the EPR guidelines. But in the EPR guidelines, there is no mention of the informal sector, whereas in the solid waste management, waste pickers and other informal waste collectors are very clearly mentioned. So the marrying the two is important. Also, we have to look at, when you're looking at complementing existing national policies, it's also important to look at what's happening in terms of international alliances. Where are we signing up and what are we doing? Voluntary and mandatory, this has always been a huge dialogue. With voluntary, it's very difficult to track, whereas at mandatory, there is something which is assured, there is a commitment. Voluntary is also often confused with CSR. Again, individual collective EPR versus the role of producer organizations. With PROs, the concept of eliminating or wiping away informal sector is definitely prevalent. So how do you look at working around the whole thing? Again, why have EPR practices
Sorry,
not?
Pinky,
Sorry, I'm just
really
done.
need to.
Just done.
We really need to provide time to the other panelists as well. I know we'll take up some of these questions in the Q&A if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
But thank you so much for all of your effort and the research. And I think this has been an excellent presentation. And we already have some questions that we'll come around to as we go. Colleen, can I pass it on to you? Just give me a second to present the slides.
I can present my slides on my end.
Sure.
Okay, there. Okay, hi, I'm Colleen Salamat, the plastic campaigner of Eco Waste Coalition, and I'm just gonna give a very brief overview of the EPR in the Philippines, which is very new. This lapsed into law last year, July, and yeah. For the scope and coverage, the EPR in the Philippines is very limited to plastic packaging only. And this oblige enterprises of, or what they call large enterprises under the law, who have 100 million pesos assets, or more than 100 million pesos in assets. So this could be the brand owner, manufacturer, and importer. But if the manufacturer have more than one brand they're carrying, automatically the EPR obligation would be passed to the brand owner. And then these are the targets for the recovery of plastic product footprint. So take note that these targets are solely for recovery of plastic product footprint. By the end of the year, it's going to be 20%, and then by the end of next year will be 40%. So it increases up to 20% every year. And who can do the EPR programs? These are PROs and obliged enterprises themselves, or collective. So this is the term in the implementing rules and regulations of the EPR Act. For the collectives, it's technically the obliged enterprises network or platform, whereas the PROs could be voluntary or could be hired by the obliged enterprises, could be any organizations. So there are three options for the obliged enterprises on who can do their EPR framework. EPR programs. The scope and cover, this is the framework of the EPR. And even if the government is saying that in the law, it's only limited to plastic packaging, they're also seeing this framework to be done in other types of materials or in other types of waste. So it's divided into two. One is on reduction and the other one is on recovery. The reduction, it's on the adoption of reusable products, redesign of the packaging, reusability, to improve reusability, recyclability, or retrievability, and inclusion of recycled content or recycled materials in the product. This is very evident in terms of the EU guidelines, because as we can see now in the market, for example, in H&M, they put labels in the clothes that says this is 60% polystyrene and such. So that's what they're also trying to do here. And next is on the adoption of appropriate product refilling systems for retailers, viable reduction rates plan, IEC campaigns, and labeling of the products. Next is on recovery. One is for waste recovery schemes through redemption, buyback, offsetting, diversion of recovered waste into value chains and value adding useful products through recycling, transportation of recovered waste, cleanups, and this is the alarming part, on the establishment of commercial or industrial scale recycling, composting, thermal treatment, etc. Since in this EPR, we're talking about plastic packaging, and later you will see that there's more details here on how they plan to do it in terms of big scale recycling. And lastly is partnership with local government units, communities, and informal waste sectors. Okay, so this is currently the trend in the Philippines when it comes to addressing plastic pollution for big companies. We saw that Nestle and even Procter & Gamble, Unilever partnering with cement industries. So they put it in cement kilns because there's also a separate department order or ministry order from the Environment and Natural Resources that is explicitly encouraging to do cement kilns. Thus, the inclusion of sachets on the plastic roads are happening in the country. So we believe, and this is a fear for us, that the EPR is actually a scheme that could legitimize false solutions. So here are the concerns. Number one, there's no targets for production reduction. We saw that there are targets for recovery, but none for the production or for the amount of plastic packaging that they're putting in the market. And again, the establishment of commercial or industrial scale recycling, thermal treatment. In the implementing rules and regulations section, specifically on section 5.4, it says that they should ensure the proper segregation, collection, transport, storage, treatment, and disposal of solid waste, reformulation, and adoption of the best environmental practices in solid waste management, excluding incineration. But we saw that in the recovery process, there's a blend, they encourage the establishment of thermal treatment. And next is on the auditing part, there's no way for CSOs to actually do or report, because in the auditing part, the PROs shall engage an independent third-party auditor, and then they will report the auditor's report, and they will report the auditor's report to the department. So the department technically did not initiate the auditing. It was more of the PROs or the obliged enterprises to do their auditing. And next is the offenses. There are only two offenses in the law. One is the failure to register for EPR. And the second one is the failure to comply with the plastic product footprint targets or the recovery targets. Next is for the fines and penalties. For the first offense, it's 5 to 10 million. Second is 10 to 15 million pesos. And third offense is the 15 to 20 million pesos with automatically suspension of business permit. However, this is actually a very small amount, considering that this could just be an annual salary of the management positions in this types of in plastic industry. in the implementing rules and regulations as well. Again, this is very this contradicts the section 5.4 of the same policy measure, because here in the waste hierarchy, even if the top one is reuse, you can still see that waste to energy and chemical recycling to convert plastics to monoforms as feedstock to petrochemical industry are present in the waste hierarchy. So since they encourage the recovery of plastics, of plastic packaging, this is the waste hierarchy that they're technically planning to do. And this is how they encourage these companies to address the waste of the waste that they've recovered. So first is reuse, mechanical recycling, again, chemical recycling. Alternative recycling is technically recycling through arts and crafts. And then next is on co-processing, waste to energy, and lastly is disposal in sanitary landfills. Okay, for the opportunities, we saw that number one, there's a contrary to the India's EPR in the Philippines, there's actually very specific provisions for informal waste sectors. The law encourages partnership with the communities and informal waste sectors, and in the implementing rules and regulations, it highlighted that the collection shall ensure that such standards and rules are complied with and may introduce higher standards for safeguards for the informal waste sectors. So this provision is actually included in the implementing rules and regulations. And of course, the adoption of reuse and refilling systems. That's one way of entry also for the CSOs. And I think that's it. So I look forward later for the question and answer. Back to you, Pita.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And thank you so much for highlighting the challenges and your recommendation for EPR in the Philippines. The questions are open, so please keep your comments and questions coming. And now we move on to the next presenter, which is Miko. Miko, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. So yeah, just for the next 10 minutes, I'll just go over this particular EPR scheme, or you'd be the judge if this is a real solution or this is greenwashing. So this is called plastic offsetting. You can go to the next slide. It's something that maybe you've heard if you're familiar with the climate markets. This is very, very much similar to carbon offsetting, where you're trading these emissions as commodities or as credits. And maybe just to start off, I am pulling out this quote from the father or the inventor of EPR. And probably you've heard this guy from Sweden. He popularized EPR back in the 1990s. And yeah, probably you've seen these schemes grow or starting in Europe. So this is what an interview back in I think earlier this year. So you can, I don't know, I can provide the link to you. This is from Packaging Insights. He was asked what he thinks about EPR, and it's something that you're seeing mushrooming, especially in Asia, as Pinky mentioned. You've seen it in different countries now in Asia, at least in the last 10 years. So next slide. So yeah, would be our magic question. So is it a viable tool for addressing or at least transitioning to a circular economy? And we are now hearing carbon offsetting or plastic offsets, and actually adopting this from the climate markets. Colleen briefly discussed this as part of the Philippine EPR. Next slide. So just to give you an outline on what will I cover for this presentation. So there's an overview about plastic offsetting, the role of PROs, or what we call producer responsibility organizations, EPR. So would be our fair price when it comes to EPR fees, corporate responsibility, how is it being implemented in other countries, and some recommendations. So next, I pulled this in definition from the Plastic Solutions Review. It was a website developed by Break Free from Plastic Movement. You can, I can maybe put the link in the chat box later. So it gives you a menu of different so-called solutions that are being offered by service providers, by governments, through policies and business products. So what's a plastic credit? So it's a tradable certificate. So it's if you're familiar again with the carbon markets, there's also that carbon credit. So you can sell this credit to mainly obliged companies. So for example, if you have a business and you're producing X tons of plastic and you want to offset and you can't do something about it in terms of reducing your footprint, then your option would be, if you want to be a good citizen of your country, then here's an option for you. So you can buy a plastic credit so that you can be given a certification that you're a plastic neutral company or business. And a number of countries rather, as mentioned earlier, in the Philippines, this has been incorporated or instituted as part of plastic policies. And in the Philippines, you see this language in the latest EPR law. And this is something that's not unique in the Philippines. You also see glimpses of this in India, in Indonesia, and other countries. Next slide. So you're wondering what are PROs? It was mentioned earlier by Colleen. So PROs are producer responsible organizations. So essentially they are service providers. So what they do is they offer their products or services to businesses that are often required by law or by EPR guidelines to address their respective plastic footprint. And I got this screenshot from Facebook. So I just found this line very interesting. So it says, let the magic begin. I don't know if that's something, did you create that magic in terms of like solving our plastic waste or your plastic footprint? And in this case, it's they're selling or marketing their platform where you can buy credits by outsourcing a service of collecting or recovering plastic waste. So in this case, you pay a business like, in this case, Plastic Exchange. You pay someone like PCX, Plastic Credit Exchange, or Vera to do this service for you. In turn, these companies or these service providers, they will collect the waste for you. They will recover the waste for you. They will treat plastic waste for you, equivalent to whatever credit you're buying. So if, for example, you're buying 1 ton of worth of plastic credits, so 1 ton of plastic waste, then that's the amount that you need to pay them, and they will offset that amount for you and give you a certificate. So next, so what's the fair amount, or what's the fair price for plastic pollution? If you look at the websites of these service providers, they would offer you prices that range from $200 to $800 per ton. This is on plastic waste. So if you look at the websites of Vera Standards or PCX, you'll get these numbers. And the numbers range, or they have this diversity or in terms of their products. So some of them just involves collection. Some of them involves co-processing or burning plastic waste in a cement kiln. They use it as feedstock to produce cement and so on. So you have that range of products that companies can do, or at least choose from, and to become plastic neutral. And next slide. Yeah, do you think it's a fair price? I got this screenshot from a YouTube channel just to figure out. So what does a PET bottle is priced, at least in scrap shops in the Philippines? At least this guy said it's 10 pesos per kilogram. So that translates to around I think that's around 1,700 US dollars per ton. So yeah, that's the price of the PET bottle. But I think Pinky, what mentioned earlier, next slide, is what does this cost entail? And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that are not being internalized or incorporated in this cost. And this report came out from Tear Fund Foundation, where they estimated that more than 200 million people face increased in intense floods because of plastic pollution. And these are something that we don't factor in when we do our pricing for plastic collection or recovery activities. And most of the time, these are being paid by the government as well as our citizens. I'm just also mindful of time. Just next slide, just wanted to show you different things on how to actually compute what we did a fair price. And this is a report from WWF. So they wanted to see what are the hidden costs of plastic waste, just to understand how do we compute for the price. And in their estimates, the cost of plastic in 2019, for example, is at least $3.7 trillion, at least over the estimated lifetime of these materials. Next slide. Unfortunately, this is EPR implementation in Asia. This is something that's not unique. This screenshot is from the Philippines, but it's not unique in the Philippines. This is something that we're seeing across the region, that there are low compliance rates. And because there are a lot of factors, businesses aren't prepared. Maybe the prices aren't attractive to businesses to actually shift, or maybe scare them because the price, as mentioned earlier, may be too low to actually make that shift. And if you ask me what would be the fair price, yeah, what would corporations need to do to make them switch to reusables? Is it like should the prices of plastic, should it be raised to like 10,000 US dollars per ton? Is it 18,000 US dollars? I think it's around that range compared to like just 800 US dollars, because at 800 companies can just pay that and continue business as usual. Just going to the last slide. I know I'm on time. Already out of time. Just to share some recommendations about what a good EPR should look like. So you can just read these points, but just wanted to emphasize on the last part, the recognizing the limitations of EPR schemes. And I think this is something that people here, activists or government officials, should understand, that EPR is not a silver bullet in terms of plastic policies. We need to understand and also recognize that it should be complemented by other instruments like bans, design standards, and incentives for use. So yeah, thanks. That's it. On to you, Arpita.
Thank you so much, Miko, for explaining plastic credits and offset schemes and why they are not the magic silver bullet that they are shown to be. I now invite our next panelist, which is Kabir, to make his presentations. There you go, Kabir.
Thank you for putting the presentation on the screen. I'm sharing the position of International Alliance of Waste Pickers with regards to extended producers responsibility, as well as some findings of Alliance of Indian Waste Pickers using that position in India, and what were the outcomes. So can we move forward? Next slide. I don't have the access to change the slides. So the acknowledgements are here. We are. Okay, so can I share my screen? It will be much more easier for me to
No,
navigate.
sorry, I got confused between the your slide and Miko's, but this is fine.
Yeah. So we acknowledge the role that Taylor, Harris, Nikita, and the EPR Working Group of International Alliance and members of Alliance of Indian Waste Pickers who contribute to the making of this presentation. It is their findings and the work that they have done that I'm using it today. Next slide. So this was the working group. This whole position was developed by a very thorough discussion of waste pickers and waste pickers organizations across the world. And this position you will be seeing in next few minutes. Next slide. So one of the things which we have to remember, that there were these things about the risks that EPR poses for us at International Alliance. The EPR is both opportunity as well as a threat to our work, because one of our fear is that a lot of the producer responsibility organizations may consolidate and monopolize the waste management systems, displacing the waste pickers who are the critical actors in the process. And then the other problem that EPR poses is that it requires a different way of working, which is engaging with producers, which possibly makes it difficult for a lot of waste pickers to enter this space, especially if you look at the producer responsibility organizations. Very few of our organizations can qualify for it if there is not a lot of support for them to do so. Next slide. And right now, what is happening is that we have EPR systems being set up, which are inspired by countries in the West. And countries in the West, there is the exposure of it to informal economies very low. That said, that there are waste pickers across the world, excluding Antarctica and Greenland. We have waste pickers at some level or the other found in most countries where they are recovering recyclables. But there's no mapping of waste picker actors in any of the geographies when EPR systems are being discussed. We also have a narrow definition of stakeholders. Pinky and few other colleagues pointed out the case of India, where the legislation does not recognize waste pickers. And the other thing, which is the case with that, the stakeholders, there is no orientation for waste pickers. Waste pickers' work is the most impacted by extended producers' responsibility, but do they know about extended producers' responsibility as a norm? No. And there has been very little investment either from the government side or from producers' side to do that. But in recent years, waste picker organizing itself is doing some level of orientation of waste pickers on EPR, and this is one of the outcomes that I'm presenting it to you. The other issue which we have is that there is a lack of transparency within the system, which basically is that we don't know how much producers are producing and how we know that these are the targets they have been setting up. This is what they're recovering. But eventually the question comes, which is covered under various legislation, sometimes Trade Secrets Act. It's just that we don't know how much are they putting into the market in the first place. And recovering then becomes secondary. When you're recovering, you're just putting the targets and show that, oh, there's a lot of work being done, but is it being balancing out versus the historical pollution? No. Thank you. Next slide. Risk is that most of the EPR in the world, it's right now, everybody wants to do EPR on HDPE, LDPE, PET bottles, because they are high density plastics, easily recycled. But these are the plastics, they are easily recycled, because of the historical and knowledge and contribution of waste pickers and the ecosystem of informal recycling sector, which gave space to these materials to be recycled in the first place. But what is happening is that it is that the informal workforce had made this material recyclable and valuable. And right now, everybody's targeting this material under EPR because you have existing systems set up. And then the other issue is that a lot of EPR is not covered. A lot of materials which we have, which waste pickers collect or waste picker enterprises collect, we don't get complete value, particularly those with low recycling material like multi-layered plastic. What do? We are collecting it. So they don't have a system of dealing with it. Next slide. And then we did this whole, when we started working on extended producers responsibility, a large part of our work was about educating waste pickers about what extended producers responsibilities, understanding, getting their inputs, what we done. Then we did case studies. So you will see the organizers will share the link of EPR webpage of International Alliance of Waste Pickers, where we have case studies from different parts of the world. Starting, you have Brazil, you have India, Swatch, you have Uruguay. So we have different case studies, good and bad, which gives you a sense of what is happening on EPR. These discussions, training, and everything helped us to frame the position on EPR. And that's the position that we tested out on ground in India, which I'm sharing with you. Next slide. So what is waste pickers are asking? Waste pickers are asking that we need funding for organizing work. And if you look at historically, employers have funded trade unions. And in this case, extended producers responsibility is one form of employment engagement where we are engaging with producers. And they have to give some contribution to the organizing process of waste pickers. And it is beneficial for our producers on another side too, because when you have an organized workforce, the recovery of material is faster and you can maintain transparency and you can ensure traceability in the system. And then we need support for recycling of non-recyclable materials and low value materials. Then the other question which waste pickers are putting is that there needs to be a representation of waste pickers in the bodies which talk about extended producers responsibility. And waste pickers can also have tech skills. We need some training on how to use. A lot of our colleagues, waste pickers, use cell phones. So there is a way to sort of connect and make the system a little more traceable and transparent for recovery of materials. Next slide. And then we need to ensure that extended producers' responsibility generate opportunities and recognition for informal waste pickers to access labor and social protections and advancement within material management systems and decision-making process. Next slide. So one of the very fundamental issue is that a lot of time waste pickers who are not affiliated or are independently working or informally working on their own, they need to also get a benefit of extended producers responsibility, especially those who have chosen to stay out of cooperatives or any other form of organizing. So the EPR benefits also need to be reaching them. Next slide. So now the principles of EPR as workers whose work contributes to increasing the value of discards. And they also want that as a part of when you start EPR work, make sure that all the actors in the value chain, informal waste and recycling sector or informal workers engaged in recycling in informal and cooperative settings, whatever terminologies you use, we may have to make sure that all the actors within that system are recognized, and there needs to be a mapping of the research, the actors. Next slide. And then we need recognition of workforce. EPR shouldn't come as a charity, like you're giving some sort of social responsibility. It is producers' responsibility to recover materials, and recognizing waste pickers as their categorical imperative. Next slide. So the other thing which we may have to make sure that is that the principles that we have EPR system, if we have an EPR system like India, which is not co-produced by the direct engagement with waste pickers, the chances of waste pickers getting displaced is higher. And at the same time, the recovery and the efficiency which we see in the through waste pickers will go down. So it is utmost important that waste pickers are part of the designing process. And we should also improve the packaging and design. Only monopolymers are right now preferred and are recycled compared to, say, multi-layered plastics, which are a cause of concern. So some level of changes in the design has to happen. Next slide. We need to make sure that we build from what already exists and not create a parallel supply chains, as has been suggested by many deposit return schemes, which technically creates a parallel system against the already informal recovery mechanism which we have in our societies. Next slide. And then it should be mandatory. It should be government run. There should be a role of government in it. There should be a role of producer responsibility organization, waste picker organizations defined by the government after co-producing this system. And voluntary EPRs don't work very well because the negotiation power of workers is very low in the system. Next slide. And it should mandate integration of waste pickers in the discussion. Next slide. What we saw in India was that in India, EPR is government-led, but the challenge is that it ignores the informal waste pickers and actors in the recycling chain. The other thing, which is that it has given the responsibility of monitoring EPR to Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards, and the regulatory authorities are not able to move forward. Next slide. There needs to be transparency and oversight in the system, which is missing in the system right now. Transparency with regards to waste pickers integration too. Next slide. And there's a lot of ambiguity in how EPR projects are being designed. So you actually don't have transparency on ground, what we noticed in India. And a lot of places, there is increased participation of private players and it excludes waste pickers. So, and these private players are also not disclosing how much are they recycling and how the systems are working. So there is complete lack of transparency within the private players. I'll leave it here and then we can come back to some of these recommendations. There needs to be other parts of it, and it is already there on our website, epr.globalrec.org, and you can find all the details of International Alliance position. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kabir, for presenting the insights from the work and the research that you all have done and the demands as well. This has been an excellent set of presentation. I'm really grateful for all of you to come together. Also want to extend thanks to the participants for patiently waiting for their questions to be picked up. We are running slightly behind schedule, but I hope that you all can stay for a couple of more minutes so that we have the chance to address some of the questions here. And I want to commit to promising to get you the answers to your questions after the webinar is over as well, through coordination with the panelists present today. So my first question is to Pinky Ji. This is from Beatrice. Beatrice says, Hong Kong is implementing a waste charging system in April next year using designated bags and labels to charge citizens. Do you have references to share from Asian countries that are using these modes of waste charging? What are the challenges?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat that again?
Hong Kong is implementing a waste charging system in April next year using bags and labels to charge citizens. Do you have references from Asian countries that are using the modes of waste charging, and what are the challenges?
I think I don't have a specific example, so to say, but like I have mentioned many a time, when we're looking at operationalizing schemes, the burden is often placed on citizens per se, in the hope that it is going to, dissuade citizens from using the same. And it's not surprising that this has been the most popular mode of charging citizens to do so. However, I think it's also important while you're charging citizens in terms of looking at a behavior change approach, it's equally important to look at the flip side of charging the producers for giving out these kind of bags.
Right. Nico, Colleen, Kabir, do you also have anything to add regarding this question?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You can check. There's, I think, case studies about Korea about their pay-as-you-throw schemes. But it's really more of just introducing or encouraging people to sort their waste. These volume-based schemes are encourage people to not to include organic waste, for example, and just consider composting. So that helps. I think maybe Trish or someone can post a case study on that. It was made by Gaia. Thanks.
Thank you, Nico. I have another question, although I'm not very sure what that means. Any example of Asian country mandating eco-technology? I'm not sure if it refers to eco-modulation, or do you mean some safe and sustainable way of managing waste? Anybody has any answers to this? Any example of Asian country mandating eco-technology? I'll move on to the next question in that case. Are there any successful examples of producers implementing EPR well? I'm turning to you, Nico, for if you have any answers. Otherwise, it's open for all of us to address this.
I think there was a comment here about from Pinky. I'll start from that. Well, there are no perfect EPR schemes, so it's really just a mix of different instruments where you can put together. And I think there are pieces, for example, in the India EPR guidelines that you would think, oh, this is a good practice. I think there's a particular part in the guidelines that advocate for a registry. So that particular part, I think that's a good practice. But yeah, maybe our colleagues from India would can comment more on the other parts. So yeah, those are the things we need to look at these details and just find what are the good things about these schemes and maybe put together if you're providing some recommendations to your government ministries.
Pinky, Kabir, anything to add to that?
I think there are no good examples. If you ask me in specific context, there is work in progress. That is, and Brazil is an outstanding example of engagement on EPR, where and I think it also came out during the former presidency of the current president Lula, that they came up with a system, and it's also an outcome of progressive labor organizing, knowing that Lula was a trade unionist. And that resulted in waste pickers having some level of contractual arrangements, including transparency, systems in place through an app to recover recyclables and get a bonus from producers to do the recycling. And that is one sort of example. It has some legislative backing, but it's not your mandatory EPR. It's a voluntary system in place. The second set of engagement that we have of producers with waste pickers, is Pune, where Swachh has a co-op, where some level of payment. Now, a payment is given for the collection and sending the multi-layered plastic, which cannot be recycled, to the co-processing units. The thing is that from environmental perspective, it's not very good with just burning multi-layered plastic. And from waste pickers' point of view is that we are getting some money out of it to cover some costs, but it doesn't cover everything. And especially when you see multi-layered plastic itself, it's so light, it takes a lot, multiple times you have to bend, you have to pick. So there's a lot of labor intensive picking, and it's not being compensated apart from the other costs. And the end goal is not also solving the problem, but burning it. Whereas we need some sort of discussion. The other thing for now, producers are showing interest in engagement with waste pickers, which is welcome, but there are unequal power relationships where waste pickers, because they're not organized, do not have the same power as the producers. So because of this inequality in power relations, it becomes very difficult for waste pickers to negotiate something. And that's why I will say it's work in progress and not exactly we have the best case scenarios.
Thank you for that. I'm quickly moving to the next two questions because I feel like they are very important to be addressed today. What are your thoughts on cross-sectoral EPR, where a single EPR policy deals with different kinds of waste that can solve the issue of multiple obligations, formalities, compliance on brand owners and producers? Two people actually asked this question, it seems. So I'm taking it up, turning to you, Pinky ji, to first take a stab at it, and then perhaps Pauline, looking for your responses as well, and Kabir.
I think that's a good question, and that's something that I wanted to raise. Looking at other waste streams, very often what we look at is look at waste streams from a singular lens, and because that becomes the focus of the problem. In the past, it was batteries, and then it became e-waste, and now plastic is the focus. But very soon there's textiles coming up, there's construction coming up, and everything is looked at it in silos. And when we're looking at it cross-sectorally, I don't think so. We should just look at it from that domain, because there are multiple other issues that need to be looked at in terms of gender justice, environmental justice. We also need to look at it from geographies in terms of how the ecosystem is structured. Is it a coastal area, mountainous area? I think when you're looking at it, and then in totality, look at it from a circular economy, more from a reduce reuse perspective, and not touching recycle so much, but I'm looking at prominence for reduce and reuse. And also, once that is done, to look at it from what other enabling mechanisms are needed. And very often we just put out the policy and don't fill in the blanks. We don't operationalize it. We don't give a thought of how do we create those opportunities to implement the system. Pauline, over to you.
Yeah, I think in this question, I think this is what the Philippines is trying to do, because it's in the EPR. It says that the plastic packaging is just the beginning, but they're planning to do it in other type of waste as well. But this kind of approach is not this framework that you saw earlier on reuse and recovering. This cannot be covered for electronic waste, for example, that needs dismantling and such. So I don't think, like Pinky said earlier, one size doesn't fit all for the EPR, and specifically in the different types of waste. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Colleen and Pinky. It seems that Nico has already answered the question on if FMCGs do plastic credit or as a buyer, do they have to do EPR again? And if they do it again, so double cost is incurred. Thanks for answering that. I have one question. Our current EPR clauses, do they cover the overall cost throughout the life cycle or only waste management cost? I believe this is for Indian EPR. So Kabir, Pinky, please go ahead.
No, they don't cover even the waste collection cost. So that's plain and simple. I don't think. Forget about upstream. The downstream also they are very sort of bare minimum, and what they're looking at is transportation and burning it and getting done with it. That's about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. I think this is only the beginning of our series of conversations relating to EPR and all cross-sectional issues around EPR. We are very glad that you could join today. I hope everyone learned, and I hope everyone had more food for thought and more reflection to go back to. Unfortunately, we couldn't go too much into the new zero draft and what it says about EPR. It is also quite a dismal picture, but we have recommendations coming from the leaders in front of you. and more leaders across the Asia Pacific and other regions of Gaia and BFFP and our brilliant members as well. So keep out for that material. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks all.
Thank you.